From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
We were talking about Abraham the last time, how he was called out of his homeland and told to go to a land he'd never seen. And he gave up a lot. Now remember, we said that back here, this is before the law, this is before Moses, this is before anything is written down. Moses is the first one to write down the revelation of God. He went up to Mount Sinai, he was there 40 days, you know the story, he was getting the pattern of the tabernacle, the worship, and the law, and everything was being revealed to him, and he was recording it. But prior to that, God's dealing directly with his servants. So Abraham, I believe, God spoke to him in an audible voice, or maybe appeared to him as the angel of the Lord, or something. It doesn't really say, but he's dealing directly with his servants. There's no Bible to read. They're not saying go to this scripture or that scripture. God's speaking directly. And so God calls Abraham to go to this place, this promised land. And he responds. He gives up his family. He gives up his homeland. He gives up his religion. You know, he gave up everything to serve God. And we're going to see that as we look at some other people like Moses, and we said Paul in the New Testament, they gave up a lot to serve God. But Abraham, of course, in Genesis 12, verse 3, we'll look at that, we'll review that. He says, actually verse 1, now the Lord said unto Abraham, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, and unto a land I will show thee. He hadn't even shown him the land. And I will make thee a great nation. I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So that's the promise. If you'll follow me, I'll give you this land, and I'll make you a blessing to all the nations of the earth. Now, Abraham is certainly a blessing. He's been a blessing to all the nations. Of course, you know, Isaac was the ancestor of Jesus. And even his son by Hagar has been blessed. I mean, the Arabs have been blessed. If they will think about it, God provided for them. You know, we have to remember that the Arabs and the Jews are half brothers. So even though they're killing each other over there and blowing each other up, they're still half brothers. And so, you know, God is still dealing with the Arabs. Now, the Arabs always knew that. See, when Muhammad came along, the Arabs, most of them were worshiping idols. And some of them had converted to Christianity and some to Judaism, but most of them were idol worshipers. But they all knew that Abraham was their father. No matter what they worshipped or what religion, they all knew that they were the son of Abraham, who was God's prophet. So it's, you know, when you see all of this political stuff and all of this terrorism and stuff, just remember that they're brothers. They're fighting each other. And, of course, the Arabs say that the promised land is for them, that was given to Hagar and Ishmael. But the scripture says Isaac was the one to inherit, and he's the ancestor of Jesus. So, but he gave up everything to move to this land. So he was faithful. He didn't, you know, you have to understand, he could have stayed where he was at and had a good life. He was no doubt, prosperous and, in the community and, comfortable when God called him. Just like Moses gave up everything to serve God. If you look at, and we'll start looking at Moses, Exodus 2, verse 10. You know the story. Moses was put in the river by his mother in the ark and found. Of course, Pharaoh was killing off all the male children. Exodus 2, verse 10 says, verse 9. Look at that. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, that's the child's mother, take the child away and nurse it for me, and I will give you thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. Now, in those days, women who were, wealthy or prominent would hire a nursemaid to nurse their children. And so she hired Moses' mother. So he got raised by his own mother, which of course was in God's plan because, see, they were in slavery and they had no worship of God. Now, most of the Israelites were probably worshiping the gods of Egypt to please their master. But there's always this remnant, like Moses' mother and father, who taught their children secretly about the God of Israel and the worship of Israel and who he was. And so all his life as he's growing up in the household of Moses, they're teaching him the Egyptian way, and his mother is teaching him about God. So she's part of this faithful remnant that you see in the Bible all through. And so when he gets to be of age, he decides to go with his brethren. And he gives up everything. I mean, he's raised, if you look at verse 10, the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, because I drew him out of the water. So he grew up in the household as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he was a prince. He could have perhaps been the Pharaoh, because the Pharaohs would always pick their successor before when they knew they were going to be dead or they got, old. They would pick one of their sons to be their successor. And so he might have been the Pharaoh. Certainly he would have been a prince of Egypt the rest of his life, if nothing else. He had power, wealth, position, everything, in the household of Pharaoh. And it says in verse 11, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, he went out unto his brethren and looked to their burden. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Now, how did he know they were his brethren? Because his mother told him. She told him who he really was and who his people were, and pointed him towards the slaves as that was his nation. And so he saw they're fighting, and he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So, now, here we have Moses, and here's another contrast, Moses and Samson. Samson's supposedly the strong man of the Bible. He kills his enemies and all of that. But Samson wasn't strong unless the Spirit was on him. The rest of the time, he was just a whiny little playboy. That's what he was. Give me a wife. Give me this. I want that. That's all he was. Now, Moses was a warrior. He was a prince. He didn't say the Lord came down and anointed him to kill this Egyptian. He just did it. He just boop, 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 knocked him out and killed him. So, hit him in the sand. He was afraid because they saw, and he says, when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore dost thou smite thy fellow? And he said, who made thee a prince and judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. So, somebody saw him kill the Egyptian. And that made him, of course, a wanted man. And he was going to try and deliver the Hebrews by himself. He was going to try to just start a revolution and, get rid of the Egyptians and free the Israelites. And that wasn't, of course, God's plan. And they said, are you going to kill me like you did the Egyptian? Well, right away he knew that somebody had found out and he was a wanted man. Yeah. Just like in the New Testament, when Jesus comes along, the Jews wanted him to take the throne of David and kick out the Romans. They looked at him as just another guy that was going to revolt against the Romans. And when he refused, he said, my kingdom's not yet. And he didn't, they wanted to make him a king, and he said no. And they tried to kill him. Then they tried to get rid of him because he wouldn't do what they wanted him to do, and that was kick out the Romans and reestablish, Israel. Well, he said, that's going to happen, but not now. So they wanted him to do the same thing. They wanted him to, be a political leader, and this is what Moses was going to do. He thought he could free these people by himself. And, of course, that wasn't going to happen like he wanted it. So what does he do? He flees. He goes out in the desert, and he says, when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So he's out, he crosses the desert, he's over in Midian, and he's on the run. And he spends 40 years in the desert. He figures everybody's forgotten about me and the deliverer. And the Hebrews are still in slavery. They're still making bricks without straw. They're still building cities for Pharaoh. All of that. And here he's out in the desert, and he thinks that, I'm done. So he's probably, when he leaves Egypt, he's probably 40. And he spends 40 years in the desert with his father-in-law, marries, has a family, herds his sheep, runs his business, So he's 80 years old before he does anything for God. That's encouraging to me. So I just had another birthday. So Moses didn't even do anything for God till he was 80, so I feel pretty good now. That makes me feel good. Now I know they live longer and all that, but still. Just remember, Moses didn't do anything really for God until he was 80. That's when he sees the burning bush, and that's where we're going next. You go over to chapter 3, verse 1 says, Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. Now, he's a priest, but who's he worshiping? The God of Israel. See, again, you see these people all through the Old Testament. They're worshiping God. Melchizedek, he's worshiping God. The true God. Now, he's not an Israelite, but he's worshiping. You go in the New Testament, you see Cornelius. He's a Gentile. He's a Roman officer. And he's worshiping the God of Israel. Not the Roman gods. He's worshiping the God of Israel. And you see these people, they're sprinkled all over through the Bible. They're just people that God reveals himself to. And I think it's to show that God will save anyone who will respond. Cornelius, where did he get his revelation? God had to appear to him or something and show him that, Cornelius was very faithful. He took a big risk by not worshiping the Roman gods. He's a Roman officer in the Roman army. And yet, here he is, his whole household is worshiping the God of Israel. So you see these people, and this is one of them, Jethro. He's a priest of Midian. He's out in the desert, but he's worshiping the true God. And it says that he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. Now, I'm going to just say something here. When you talk to people about God and the Bible, and they ask you about, how about that bush that didn't burn up, and how about the big fish that swallowed Jonah and all this? You really think there's a bush that can burn and fish that can swallow a man? Just remember, and of course they'll try and say, well, there's this species of fish. Christians try to say, well, there's probably a species of fish that could swallow a man, or this bush has some kind of sap that would burn for long. Just remember, God only had to prepare one fish. He only had to have one bush burn. He didn't have to create a whole species of fish. One fish. It said he prepared a fish. God can create even today. Don't get all wrapped up about, biologically, can this fish eat a man and all. You're wasting. People like to do that. They'll tie you up. The devil will tie you up in that. And then you get into all these arguments, and it all ends up, okay, maybe, and nobody's ever gets called, comes to God over that. Just tell him, God only had to make one fish. That's all you need to know. Just believe that there's one fish that swallowed a man and spat him out. And then the fish, went away. Again, I have to say this, because I always say it. Christians get laughed at for this kind of belief, but Muslims believe the same thing. They believe Moses saw a burning bush. They believe that Jonah got swallowed by a whale, and nobody laughs at them. They believe all this. Old Testament, right up to Jesus. They even believe Jesus as a prophet. So, but nobody's trying to shut them down. Nobody's messing with them. But they accept the Old Testament as part of their revelation. And so, again, if we were Muslims, we wouldn't be having these conversations, because they're being left alone. But the Christians are being attacked. So just to kind of keep that in your mind when you talk to people, that God only had to do one of these to make, his word, come to pass. So Moses is seeing the burning bush. So he turns aside and he wants to see, wow, this is pretty unique. A bush that burns up or is on fire is not burning. And of course the Lord calls him. He says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside, God called to him and said, Moses, and he said, here am I. And he said, draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. And he says, I'm the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. So, he hid his face. When Paul saw Jesus on the Damascus Road, he fell down. He said, what do you want me to do? And so we have this experience, which I think the church really needs today, is to see God high and lifted up. Amen. Just like Isaiah. Oh, yes. What did Isaiah do? Isaiah, you read Isaiah 6, Isaiah was a faithful priest. Not all, most of the priests in his day were not faithful. They were worshiping secretly other things. But Isaiah was trying to serve God, and he saw Jesus. I believe he saw Jesus, angel of the Lord, high and lifted up, and he fell on his face and he said, I'm undone. It's like Pastor John used to say, you know, people have to feel unraveled. When you feel that unraveled, that I'm just falling apart, that's conviction. That's your real conviction. It's going to bring you, that's what the Jews felt. On the day of Pentecost, Peter preached, we're undone. What must we do to be saved? We know we're a mess. Show me what to do. And so the church, I think, needs, I sure need it, a vision of Jesus as he really is, to show us where we are and where he is, so we can cry out. The church needs to cry out. You know, after 9/11, people were waving their flags and saying, you know, God bless America. But you know, there was a few people that had stickers that said, America bless God. America needs to be, you know, crying out to God, because we're starting to see judgment fall on us as a nation. God's doing what he does all through the Bible. He uses one nation to judge another. You see it all through the Old Testament. You see Abraham goes to war with the kings. You see he uses Moses to judge Egypt. All historians will say that after the time of Moses, Egypt started going downhill as a world power because of the destruction of her army and all the plagues and everything that happened. God used all the nations to judge Israel in the book of Judges. You know, they'd worship their idols, and he'd send the Midianites or the Philistines, and they'd be in bondage. He used Assyria and Babylon to judge Israel again. Just all through the scripture, you see God using one nation to judge either his people or another. The Persians come in and conquer Babylon. When he says the Persians are going to take this city. It's written on the wall. And they partied on, and sure enough, they took the city. So this is a theme that you see all through the scripture. Why wouldn't America be any different? You know, Greece and Rome and all these empires were all judged. When God was finished with them, then he rose another nation up to judge them. So why wouldn't God use the Muslim nations to judge this country? Nobody wants to say that. That's not popular. A lot of people, and of course, I have to say this one before I'm done. We're in another election cycle. So all the politicians are making their rounds. They're going to church. They're talking to this group and they're talking to that group. And we have yet to have any of them say that we're under judgment. And we are under judgment. We are a very wicked, corrupt nation. And in some ways, I guess I have to say this, Islam is more righteous than we are in some things. You know, they don't abort their babies. They don't hand out birth control to their children. They don't do some of the things, I mean, they don't have one bathroom for everybody. You know what I'm saying? Some of that stuff, they're more righteous than we are. Now, I'm just going to say it that way because they are. We used to be where they are. And we've gone way, way off. So we're under judgment. And there's a remnant in this country that loves God. Some of us are here. If you're not praying for this country, you should, because, Daniel prayed for his country, and Moses prayed for his country. They all interceded. Moses interceded for Israel. He said, take them. God was going to take them, destroy them. And he said, take me instead. Daniel said the same thing. I'm crying out for the sins of my people. We're in bondage. We're in captivity for a reason. He knew they were in captivity for a reason. And he was crying out to God, to have mercy. That's what, we should be doing for our country. And not just say, well, we're America and we're Christian and, we say God, in God we trust. And that's what Israel was doing. They were saying, oh, we have the temple of the Lord. Read the book of Jeremiah, the temple of the Lord. Oh, we're okay. We can do whatever we want because we're the temple of the Lord. And in Jesus' day, the Jews said, oh, we're Abraham's children. And yet Jesus told them the kingdom has been taken from you. That's right. Well, that wasn't popular, but he's right. He said the kingdom has been taken from you. That means you're just like everybody else now. You must come to God. You don't have any special place anymore. So you don't hear that one very much either. But that's where we're at. We're under judgment. When we're under judgment, we need to pray for our nation and for this faithful remnant that's here. It's around. These churches, that we talk about, they have people in there that love God. They may be not what they should be, but there's people there that love God. And there's people there that God is going to use, I don't know if he's going to take them out of there or whatever, but there's still this faithful remnant in our country. And so we need to be part of that, or judgment is going to be even worse. Now, I think we're going to escape the supernatural judgments, but, we're going to go through some hard times as Christians. We already are. We're being shoved in the corner. We're being demonized. We're being marginalized. We're being everything. And so, again, we want to be part of this remnant that we're seeing. Moses and Noah and all of the ones that we're going to look at. They're the faithful remnant. Elijah. And then the 7,000 that God had, he didn't even know about. So, God's going to preserve those who get on their face before him.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.